The morning Helena turned 40, her husband Marcus didn't acknowledge it. He sat at the breakfast table in their grand villa, eyes fixed on a younger woman who served his wine. And Helena felt something inside her crumble like ancient parchment. She had given him 22 years of her life, borne him 3 children, managed his household with grace, and loved him with a devotion that now seemed foolish. But Marcus had grown wealthy, and with wealth came new desires. Desires for youth, for novelty, for a wife who turned heads at the Forum instead of one who bore the gentle lines of time and motherhood. That evening, Marcus made his announcement. His voice was cold, detached, as if discussing the sale of livestock. He had decided to send her away, he said, not to her brother's house where she might retain some dignity, but to his estate in the countryside. There she would be given to Darius, his eldest slave, a man who worked the olive groves. It was meant as punishment, a final humiliation. To be cast aside was one thing, but to be given to a slave as if she herself had become property, that was Marcus's cruelty perfected. Their children, grown and scattered across the empire, would never need to know the full depth of their father's disdain. Helena arrived at the country estate in early autumn, when the olive trees were heavy with fruit. She expected chains, or at least a hovel, but instead found a modest cottage near the groves, and there she met Darius. He was not what she expected. Tall and weathered by years of sun and labor, he had gentle eyes that seemed to hold stories of a different life. When the estate overseer explained the arrangement with poorly concealed contempt, Darius said nothing. He simply nodded and looked at Helena, not with the hunger or triumph she feared, but with something that looked like sadness. That first night, Darius gave her the cottage's only bed while he made a pallet on the floor. When she protested, confused by this unexpected kindness, he spoke for the first time. His voice was educated, refined even, surprising for a man in his position. He told her she need not fear him, that he understood she was here against her will and that he would ask nothing of her. Helena lay awake in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, and felt tears slip down her temples. It had been years since anyone had shown her such simple consideration. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, a routine emerged. Darius would wake before dawn to work the groves, and Helena, unable to sit idle, began to tend the small garden behind the cottage. She cooked meals, something she hadn't done since her early marriage, and found unexpected pleasure in the simple act. They ate together in companionable silence at first, but gradually words came. Darius told her his story over those quiet dinners. He had once been a scholar in Athens, a free man who had written about philosophy and poetry. But debt and betrayal had cost him everything, and he had been sold into slavery 15 years ago. The bitterness could have consumed him, he said, but he chose to find meaning in small things. The way morning light filtered through olive leaves, the satisfaction of honest work, the changing seasons. Helena shared her own story haltingly, expecting judgment but finding only understanding. Darius listened as she spoke of her children, of the love she had poured into a marriage that had withered like a vine without water. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. Instead, he said something that surprised her. He told her that she was not too old, not diminished, not less than she had been. She was simply free now, free from trying to hold the attention of someone who had stopped seeing her years ago. The words settled over her like a balm. As autumn deepened into winter, something unexpected grew between them. Darius taught her to read the Greek classics he kept hidden in a small wooden box beneath his bed, treasures he had somehow preserved through all his hardships. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, and he would explain the philosophy of Epicurus or recite verses from Sappho. Helena discovered she had a keen mind for philosophy, and Darius delighted in her insights. She taught him things too, the medicinal properties of herbs, the songs her grandmother had sung, the stories of her childhood in a coastal town he had once visited in his former life. One cold evening, when frost painted patterns on the windows, Darius reached across the table and gently took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond a polite gesture of assistance. He told her that somewhere in the cruelty of her husband's punishment, he had found an undeserved gift. That in all his years of slavery, all his losses and loneliness, he had never imagined he would meet someone like her. Someone who saw him not as property, but as a person. Someone whose presence made even this small cottage feel like home. Tears spilled down Helena's cheeks, but they were different from the bitter tears she had shed in her marriage. These were tears of recognition, of being truly seen for the first time in decades. They became partners in every sense, though legally they remained master's wife and slave, an absurd distinction that they largely ignored within the privacy of their small world. Darius loved her with a tenderness Marcus had never shown, even in the earliest days of their marriage. He noticed when she was cold and wrapped her in blankets. He asked about her thoughts and listened to her answers. He touched her like she was precious, made her laugh with his dry observations about the estate overseer's pomposity, and held her during the nights when grief over her estranged children kept her awake. In return, Helena loved him with a freedom she had never known. There were no expectations to meet, no social performance required. She could simply be herself, scarred and imperfect, and be cherished for it. Spring came, and with it an unexpected visitor. Lucia, Helena's daughter, had heard rumors of her mother's situation and traveled to see for herself. She arrived with indignation burning in her eyes, ready to rescue her mother from what she assumed was degradation, but what she found confused her. She saw her mother laughing, genuinely laughing, as she and Darius harvested vegetables from the garden. She saw tenderness in small gestures, saw her mother's face free of the tension it had carried for years. Over dinner, Lucia watched how they communicated with glances, how Darius listened to her mother with complete attention, how her mother's hand would rest briefly on his shoulder when she passed. This wasn't captivity, this was love. Lucia pulled her mother aside, struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with what she thought she knew. Helena spoke honestly for the first time about her marriage, about the loneliness of being discarded, and about finding unexpected joy in this simple life with a man who society deemed beneath her, but who had elevated her soul. She told Lucia she had been given a second chance at happiness, and she would not squander it for the sake of appearances. Lucia left troubled but thoughtful, and Helena worried she had lost her daughter along with everything else. Summer arrived with its drowsy heat, and with it came another letter. This one bore Marcus's seal, and Helena's hands trembled as she opened it. But it was not from Marcus. It was from his new young wife, now managing his correspondence. Marcus had fallen ill, she wrote, and in his delirium he had spoken of regret, though she seemed skeptical of his sincerity. More importantly, the letter contained papers. Marcus had freed Darius, perhaps as some final inadequate gesture toward atonement, or perhaps simply because his new wife had persuaded him it was proper. Either way, Darius was no longer a slave. Helena showed the papers to Darius that evening. He held them for a long time, these documents that returned his legal personhood, then set them aside and pulled Helena close. He told her that while he was grateful for freedom, his truest liberation had come not from any document, but from loving her and being loved in return. They had both been prisoners in different ways, he in literal bondage, she in a gilded cage of expectations and diminishing returns. Together they had found something neither had dared hope for. Years later, in that same cottage surrounded by olive groves, Helena would rock her first grandchild while Darius told stories to the children, who had come to accept him as family. Marcus was long gone, his memory fading like morning mist. What remained was this life, built not on youth or status or wealth, but on the radical act of seeing and being seen. Helena had been called too old, cast aside as worthless, given away as punishment. But in that supposed punishment, she had found a love that valued her not for what she represented, but for who she was. And in loving Darius, she had reclaimed not just happiness, but herself. Sometimes, she thought, fate works in mysterious ways, turning intended cruelty into unexpected grace, and the deepest love can bloom in the most unlikely soil.